Hi there, thanks for joining me. And today I'm going to talk about an article from the BBC, which is linked in below this video. And the headline is "Failure to Plan Over Soaring Pupil Support Needs." Okay, so this is about schools and problems that schools have in coping with children with soaring is the word that they have support needs. And if you look down at the article, it says that 40% of Scottish pupils are now receiving additional support for learning. 40% of all children in Scotland need extra support. Now this is a huge number, because this is almost half of children, and in 20 years' time that's half of this future generation. And I'm going to say, on the current trajectory, that is going to increase. Now this is looking at different problems in schools and looking at approaches in schools and working out what schools are doing. So the report found that only 20% of schools have dedicated facilities for additional support for learning pupils, and dealing with their needs was increasingly a core role for classroom teachers. Okay. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about what that literally means for any child in a classroom today. Okay, now I left teaching in 2022. It's now 2025, so that's 2.5 years ago. And things have changed dramatically in those 2.5 years. I worked in one of the best schools in Glasgow, and having spoken to my colleagues there, I don't hear anything good. I don't hear anyone saying things are great, things are on the up. No. I hear things like, I can't wait to retire. I hear things like, I'm so jealous of you, me not working there anymore. I hear things like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to cope. I don't know what next year's going to be like, because there are so many issues in an average classroom. Now, let me say, the school I was in, one of the best schools in Glasgow, that is in terms of achievement and in terms of behaviour. So that means it was a school with minimal special educational needs. It wasn't a school that was highly problematic. Right, now, what an average class looks like in that school. Now, I'm picking on this school because I know the school. That's the only reason. And I'm going to say this is one of the better schools, and therefore that probably the majority of schools in the city, things are worse than this. So, first of all, what does it mean to have additional support needs? Well, let me just list some of the ones that are mentioned in this article. So the definition of additional support needs is broad. It can include emotional or behavioural issues, autism, disabilities, that means physical disabilities for example, somebody in a wheelchair, dyslexia, and language support needs. So language support needs would include children who don't have English as a first language and their English is not good, and it would include children who have difficulties linguistically for whatever reason. Okay, now, in an average classroom in the school that I used to work in, what you would have, there would be one child whose needs are so severe that that child can't be left alone. Okay, now in the school where I used to work, there are 11 classes, but there are only, I think, 6 classroom assistants or pupil support assistants. I'm not sure what they're called actually now. So that's not enough for one per class. So that's not enough for these extreme difficulties. Now, in the school, the 2 particular children I'm thinking of, I don't know either of these children, but the 2 particular children I've heard about, one of them is terminally ill, and he has to be, I guess, protected because of his health needs, and therefore he needs somebody with him, not necessarily sitting beside him all the time, but somebody whose job it is to be watching him all the time. So that's number 1. There is also a child who has severe autism and has to have somebody with her all the time, and she doesn't spend all that much time in the classroom because she doesn't sit, she doesn't want to sit, she doesn't want to do the work that the rest of the class are doing, so on. And if she doesn't get her way, she's disruptive, so she gets taken out and she walks around the school. And there's another child with extreme behavioural issues, which I'm going to say they're being pandered to. That's probably controversial. No boundaries are set for behaviour. Okay, now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about behaviour next week. So I've given you 3 examples of issues that I know of personally where a child needs somebody with them all the time. And I'm going to tell you what that means for an ordinary child in the class. Okay, so first of all, because the teacher numbers were cut, I think a year ago, I'm not exactly sure, fairly recently, that has meant that there is a massive reduction in learning support. Why has that happened? Because most schools would have a teacher that would have time to cover, small groups of children, one-to-ones with reading and extra math support. Those are the 2 areas where support is given. Literacy, reading, writing, and maths. Well, that's gone because the teacher who did that previously now has a class and is in class 4 days a week and has 1 day to do special tasks relating to her promoted post as a principal teacher. So that's a factor, which means that not only are there more problems, but these core issues of reading and number work are just being left. Okay? And it's only the very extreme cases that are being dealt with. And when I say extreme cases, that means class disruption. So if there isn't an adult sitting with or assigned to a child the whole time they're in school, this means that a class is disrupted. How are they disrupted? Sometimes it's noise. The child with needs has outbursts and is a distraction. And all attention is on that child. They would appear, from the perspective of the other children, to get special attention, get treats, get off with doing work, have an easier life. And this can create, I don't know, demoralization, let's say, in the classroom, which can lead to further need for support. Also, children with needs, if they have another adult with them, so there's a class teacher who's at the front of the class talking to the whole class, then there's a second adult somewhere in the middle of the class talking to the child that they're with. That's very distracting, especially for the children round about. Also, even although there is another adult who essentially is responsible for this child, for this particular child with needs, ultimately the class teacher is responsible for all the children in the class. And so, if there is a sensitive issue because of extreme problems with a particular child, the teacher's attention will also be on that child. So that will give the other children less attention. So if there are 30 children in the class, I'm going to give you an average class, 30 children, you've got one child with extreme difficulties, whether those are physical, emotional, behavioural or educational. One child. I'm going to say that there'll probably be classes where there's more than one, but I'm thinking of a particular school. On top of that, you're going to have a small cohort of the class who are what we would call low-level disruption. That is more or less constant. So that means things like shouting out answers, shouting out in the middle of a lesson, shouting out. Then things like chatting to a neighbour, chatting across the classroom, rummaging in bags. I don't mean that a child is in the middle of the work and they stop and they think, I don't have a rubber, it's in my bag. I mean, they're constantly, their bag is up, they've got pencils out, pencils away, sharpening pencils, essentially avoidance tactics for doing their work. And that can be somewhat disruptive. But so I would say the average classroom maybe has 5 or 6 of those. And then you've probably got another group, 5 or 6, that have additional support needs. So that means perhaps they are not on track, is the term that's used, either in maths or literacy. And I'm going to say most of these children are very quiet. They would be what you would say, they fall under the radar, and therefore their needs are not met. They are lost in the classroom. On top of that, you've got other things going on, everyday issues that arise within a classroom. On top of that, you've probably got 1 or 2 children who also are what you would say not exactly on track, but have excellent masking tactics. And so it's difficult to really get where they are, what they're capable of. Perhaps they're really good at copying from a neighbour. Perhaps they're good at making a good show. That's quite common. And you've also got on top of that children who need to be stretched The work is too basic for them. And it's very difficult to meet those needs. The teacher's attention, management's attention is taken up by the very, very small number of extreme needs to the detriment of everybody else in the classroom. That is what is going on in schools, 21st century Scotland. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in the next video about behaviour and what's going on in schools. I'm going to say Glasgow. I assume that this is reflected to some extent across the country, but I know a bit more about Glasgow. So anyway, so come back next week to hear about that, to hear about behaviour in Scottish schools. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.